So, the story of science fiction is a lot older than most people realize. See, it all started off with a book called Amazing Stories in 1926. From there, it spawned off into a whole genre of film. But before that, there was like pseudo-science fiction, which came with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and several other stories like Jules Verne and A Trip to the Moon. From there, we started off with a whole genre of filmmaking. And that started off with 1927's Metropolis, which discussed like the societal elements of the time. The Industrial Revolution, poor working hours, poor treatment of the people, capitalism, and were the bedrock of what science fiction would become later on. From there, science fiction took a bit of a step back in exchange for more genres, such as gangster films, such as musicals, stuff like that. Rotor 2 had cowboy, wartime movies, and the works. And from there, we were to the B-movie 50s era, with the atomic age, with nuclear devastation, with the commies, a sense of isolation and fear of the other, and of people who could invade and hurt us. And from there, we got monster movies like Them, 50-Foot Woman, and The Blob, which represented these societal fears of the time, along with fear of the other and the unknown, represented in Alien and in other science fiction movies, with War of the Worlds, The Day the Earth Stood Still, movies where they capture the fear, anxiety of living in the 1950s era. From there, we transition into the 60s, away from the fears of the 50s era Americana, into a more nuanced of human nature, how we stand as a society, how we stand on technology and the human condition, what makes us human, what makes a machine. Humanity is its own means to destruction. We see this in Doctor Strangelove, and we see this in films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, like Planet of the Apes. Star Trek touched on this somewhat. Logan's Run, THX 1138. All these films coming from new directors outside the Hollywood system brought us these more nuanced and more engaging depictions of the society at the time. The Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam War, and from there we go into the 70s, the end of the Vietnam War, end of all that, and people were tired of all this grittiness and harshness, just dark new Hollywood cinema films. And that's where we got the Star Wars craze and blockbuster films, E.T., RoboCop, all these feel-good, action-packed movies, still hold commentary on society very much so, but not to the same extent or the same way that science fiction movies of the past used to. And from there, we go into the 90s. After the Cold War, cyberpunk was premiered in the 80s. After everything, peacetime era of history. So we saw a lot less horror movies or fear movies or introspective movies. And from there, we move into the 90s, where we saw a lot less cyberpunk, kind of 2001: A Space Odyssey and Blade Runner type movies, and more so Stargate, Independence Day, Bill and Ted, Galaxy Quest, Austin Powers, more lighthearted depictions of the future and science fiction and American culture. And the whole landscape is overall a lot less unnerving, strict as it was before that during the Cold War. Then we got 9/11 with terrorism, civil unrest, political divide, along with an economic divide, leading to War of the Worlds, leading to several movies Hunger Games, leading to Book of Eli, leading into District 9, Wall-E, all these depictions of horrifying reality where it's devastation and destruction at our own expense, at our own cost. And while those movies show the worst of times and help really represent the fears and elements of those eras, it's important to acknowledge the escapist films from the 2000 all the way up to today to help us really get away from the fears and anxieties of those other films, where we got films like Her, Chappie, the Star Wars franchise. It's got overall just as many lighthearted films as we got darker, more cynical, introspective films too. And then we reached COVID-19, and here we are today. It's hard to really say where sci-fi and where the film industry is as of now, but it's important to acknowledge that science fiction is still strong as ever. And that's my video. This is a school project for month 3.